Imagine for a second that you are flying over the dense, seemingly endless canopy of the Amazon rainforest.
Right, just an ocean of green.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You look down, and for as far as the eye can see, there is just this unbroken sea of leaves. And, for centuries, outsiders looking down at this exact same view saw only this untouched, pristine wilderness.
A place where human beings were basically just passing through.
Yeah, exactly. But what if I told you that hidden directly beneath those trees, like cloaked completely by the leaves, are tens of thousands of enormous, perfect geometric shapes?
It's honestly staggering.
It really is. We are talking about massive circles, immense squares, sprawling straight roads, and these deeply carved embankments that stretch for literal miles.
It completely upends the picture we've had for generations. The sheer scale of what is hiding under that canopy, it forces us to rewrite the history books.
It really does. Which is exactly why we're here today. So, was southwestern Amazonia home to a vast, interconnected civilization? And, crucially, how much can our modern technology truly tell us about the mysteries of the people who shaped it? Welcome to another My Mind MashUps deep dive, where we unravel mysteries, spark curiosity, and make sense of complex ideas together.
Absolutely.
We also want to briefly thank our coffee supporters for helping fund this continued research. And of course, thank you, the listener, for sharing your time with us today.
And if you enjoy content that makes you think, follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. You can also like, share, or leave a comment to help more curious minds discover the conversation. If you would like to support the channel directly, the link is in the description.
So, we really have to establish the stakes here first. For me, looking at the folklore, the oral traditions, and just the historical narrative, this absolutely shatters that old colonial myth of the Amazon as this empty void.
Right, the idea of the virgin forest.
Yes. It strongly suggests that living indigenous knowledge preserved truths about a highly managed, densely populated landscape that conventional scholarship just frankly arrogantly ignored for centuries. The forest wasn't just a wild jungle. It was a deeply modified environment.
The paradigm shift is very real, yeah. But to understand the true magnitude of it, we really need to ground ourselves in the data.
Okay, let's get into the data.
So we are looking at a massive 2026 study published in the journal Nature. The researchers mapped these geometric structures, but, and this is a really important distinction, we must carefully distinguish between what was directly observed by the technology and what is statistically extrapolated.
Right, because there's a big gap in those two numbers.
Exactly. What they directly observed is 432 specific earthworks, but the extrapolation is where we get that headline-grabbing number of, up to 30,000 structures hidden out there.
Okay, wait. I'm doing the math in my head here. You just said they definitively found 432 earthworks on this specific run.
Yes, 432.
But the headline says 30,000. So before we figure out where the missing 29,000 are coming from, I really want to understand how they found the 432 in the first place. How do we go from a supposedly impenetrable wilderness to suddenly seeing this mapped, highly structured cultural landscape?
The breakthrough is a technology called airborne LiDAR.
LiDAR.
Right, which stands for light detection and ranging. To put it simply, researchers fly an aircraft over the forest in a really precise grid, and that aircraft fires rapid laser pulses down at the ground.
Lasers, okay.
Yeah, we are talking hundreds of thousands of pulses every single second.
But the Amazon canopy is famously thick. Wouldn't most of those lasers just bounce off the top of the trees?
Oh, they do. The vast majority of those pulses just hit leaves and branches.
So how does it work then?
Well, here is the mechanical brilliance of LiDAR. A tiny fraction of those laser pulses manage to slip through the microscopic gaps in the canopy. They hit the actual forest floor, and then they bounce back up to the sensor on the plane.
Oh, wow. So it's not like a magic X-ray machine. It's more like, okay, imagine throwing 1 million ping pong balls at a dense chain link fence.
That's a good way to look at it.
Most of them are going to bounce off the wire mesh, but a few of them will slip through the holes, hit the brick wall behind the fence, and bounce back to you.
Exactly.
And if you measure the time it takes for those specific balls to return, you can map the shape of the brick wall without ever having to move the fence.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. By measuring the exact return time of those few pulses that reach the ground, the computer system essentially filters out the first returns, which are the leaves, and it isolates the last returns, which is the solid ground.
That is so cool.
It really is. It creates this highly precise 3D digital terrain model. You are mathematically removing the vegetation.
That is wild. So during June and July of 2024, researchers flew over 4,497 square kilometers of the state's of Acre and Amazonas in Brazil. And the hard data is that they documented 432 of these earthworks. But what really gets me is that 396 of them were completely new to the project's inventory.
Almost all of them.
Yeah, they had never been mapped before. That is a crazy success rate. For context, 50 hectares is roughly the size of 90 American football fields.
It's hard to even picture that.
And they are surrounded by ditches up to 13 meters wide and 5 meters deep. I mean, a 13-meter ditch is wider than a 4-lane highway.
And you have to remember, this is all being excavated and shaped without modern steel machinery or beasts of burden.
Right. I mean, my city takes 6 months to fix a single pothole with a fleet of diesel excavators.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And these ancient societies were carving perfectly straight, 4-lane, highway-sized trenches through the earth using, wooden digging sticks, baskets, and just sheer human coordination.
Exactly.
These were not random mounds of dirt. These were highly intentional, meticulously organized public works.
And the geometry is incredibly precise, too. You have perfect quadrilateral shapes, multilateral embankments, and massive circles. The researchers actually associate these specific geometric forms with a multicultural complex they're calling the aquary.
The aquary.
Yeah, it's an umbrella term drawn from an indigenous historical name associated with the Acre River region.
Which, brings us back to that massive mathematical leap. Because if the LiDAR survey only directly mapped 432 earthworks in that specific flight path, how did the global headlines jump to 30,000 structures and millions of people?
Right, the jump seems huge.
We really have to unpack this statistical model here because that sounds like a, almost reckless extrapolation.
Well, the math is fascinating, and it's actually based on standard sampling methods. The researchers defined a vast cultural envelope for the aquary, covering roughly 183,000 square kilometers.
That's a massive area.
It is. To get their numbers, they couldn't scan the entire thing. It would take decades and cost an absolute fortune. So they used systematic flight lines, essentially taking a 10% sample of specific blocks of land across that vast area.
Okay, kind of like taking a few scoops out of a massive pot of soup to figure out what the whole pot tastes like.
Precisely. By looking at the density of earthworks in highly concentrated areas, like the region around modern-day Rio Branco, and then comparing it to the lower density peripheral areas, they scaled up their findings.
Okay, so it's a curve.
Yeah, it's a statistical model that looks at the distribution curve and estimates there are between 23,760 and 30,000 total earthworks hidden out there across the entire region.
Okay, that makes sense. I get the soup analogy. But from those 30,000 estimated earthworks, they calculated the human population. How do you go from ditches to a census?
Through a very specific equation. First, they isolated just the structures that fit the aquary period style, which they estimated to be about 16,660 earthworks.
Got it.
Then, based on radiocarbon dating models from the sites they have excavated, they assumed that somewhere between 25% and 60% of these earthworks were in use at their peak simultaneously.
Okay.
Finally, based on the sheer labor required to build these things and ethnographic data from living Epeirene communities regarding traditional gathering sizes, they assigned a supporting community of about 300 people to each active center.
Wow.
So when you run that math, the model gives you a peak population of 1.25 to 3 million people.
And I passionately defend the plausibility of those millions. I really do. Because you don't just look at a mathematical model, you look at the physical, ecological evidence left behind in the soil.
The soil is key here.
You mentioned soil science earlier, and this is where it gets amazing. We have terra preta, which translates to dark earth. It is this incredibly nutrient-rich, human-made soil. And it wasn't just ancient people tossing banana peels out the back door.
No, the chemistry of terra preta is a highly deliberate technology.
Exactly. They essentially created a slow-burning charcoal compost engine. They layered organic refuse, broken pottery shards, animal bones, and massive amounts of smoldering charcoal.
Which is brilliant in that environment.
Right, because in a normal tropical rainforest, the intense rain washes all the nutrients out of the soil. It's actually terrible for farming. But the indigenous people engineered this biochar soil that acts like a sponge, trapping carbon and nutrients in the ground for thousands of years.
It's incredible innovation.
Add to that the plant fossils, phytoliths, showing cultivated maize and squash, and unnatural concentrations of domesticated Brazil nut trees and peach palms. I mean, the Amazon wasn't this pristine jungle. It was a heavily managed, cultivated forest garden.
The ecological legacy is absolutely undeniable. I mean, the presence of terra preta and those concentrated orchards absolutely proves long-term, large-scale human modification of the environment.
Right.
The forest we see today is, in many ways, an artifact of ancient human stewardship. However, as compelling as the soil is, we must apply scientific brakes to that exact headcount of 1 to 3 million people.
You think it's too high?
Well, the figure is a model, it is not a census, and there are variables that could shift those numbers significantly.
You're talking about the assumption that every monument had 300 unique people assigned to it.
That's a major variable, yeah. The math assigns an isolated population to every single active monument. But human behavior is fluid. Multiple earthworks might have served a single larger population that traveled between them for different seasonal purposes.
Oh, like they didn't just stay in one spot?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or one massive center might have served several dispersed communities that only gather occasionally. Furthermore, built during a time period and in use during a time period are completely different things.
That's true.
The 25 to 60% overlap is a broad assumption. It's a highly defensible hypothesis to test, but it is not a direct archaeological count of bodies.
Okay, fair enough. But let's play with that hypothesis for a second.
Yeah.
If there really were 1 million or more people managing this massive landscape, cultivating the terra preta, and building these huge geometric shapes, what did their daily lives actually look like?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because if these aren't cities with houses and trash pits everywhere, I'm imagining them more like giant ancient convention centers. But people had to sleep somewhere. Were they commuting?
That is the most important distinction we can make today, and it brings us to the actual purpose of these structures. We shouldn't force our modern idea of a dense walled city onto the aquery. The archaeological evidence suggests these massive geometric earthworks were mostly public, ceremonial, and political gathering centers.
So not residential.
Exactly. When researchers dig inside many of these 50-hectare enclosures, they don't find the deep, dense domestic refuse, the everyday trash and hearths, that indicates thousands of people lived inside them year-round.
Okay, hold on. I bristle at that a little bit. If we don't call them cities, aren't we just grading them on a European rubric?
How do you mean?
Like, sorry, you didn't build stone castles and pack 1 million people into a cramped, dirty grid, so it doesn't count as a city. It feels a bit dismissive.
That actually raises a fantastic point about how we define urbanism, and it's a huge debate happening in archaeology right now. It's not about downplaying their achievement, it's about accurately describing how they chose to live.
Okay.
The populations likely lived in dispersed settlements, a low-density network spread throughout the managed forest. Think of it as sprawling suburbs woven seamlessly into an orchard. And they were connected by those remarkably straight roads that are clearly visible on the LiDAR scans. They would commute, as you said, gathering at these massive geometric centers for ceremonies, politics, and trade.
That actually sounds incredibly sophisticated. It's a decentralized society. You don't have the massive sanitation and disease issues of a cramped medieval European city, but you still have the social organization to build a 90-football field gathering space.
And we can see this wasn't the only way to live in the Amazon, which proves the region's incredible diversity. For example, if you look at the Kazarebe culture in Bolivia, which existed a bit later, they engineered their landscape totally differently.
How so?
They did have dense, permanently inhabited centers with monumental pyramidal mounds and massive platforms surrounded by extensive water canals.
So they're building upwards like classic pyramids, while the Aquarii were carving geometric shapes into the flat earth.
Right, and in the Upano Valley in Ecuador, you see another distinct system, what researchers call garden urbanism, with dense residential platform complexes linked by extensive road networks. The Aquarii in southwestern Amazonia is just one unique, brilliant solution to complex regional organization. There was no single Amazonian civilization. There were multiple, highly complex societies adapting differently to their specific environments.
If this conversation is making you think, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next My Mind MashUps deep dive.
When we look at this vast, organized, Aquarii cultural landscape, we see a people who had established a deep, sustainable relationship with their environment.
Which naturally leads us to the inevitable massive mystery here.
Yeah.
We have a vast network of managed forests, straight roads, and geometric convention centers. We have a massive population engineering the soil. So what happened to them? Where did they go?
To answer that, we have to look closely at the chronology, which is based on recalibrated radiocarbon dating from 32 different excavated sites.
Okay, what are the dates?
The Aquari-style earthwork tradition, the actual construction of these massive geometric geoglyphs, ran from roughly 600 BC to 8850. The data shows that the absolute peak of activity, where we see the most demographic and construction overlap, occurred between 8100 and 300.
But then around 8850, this centuries-long tradition of building these geometric shapes just fades out.
It does.
The geoglyphs stop being made. Why? What caused this massive architectural decline?
What's fascinating here is what the data allows us to definitively rule out. We must explicitly correct a very common historical misconception.
Okay.
European colonization did not cause the end of the Aquari geometric earthworks. The abandonment of that specific geoglyph tradition happened more than 6 centuries before a European ever set foot in the Americas.
Wait, really? So the AB 850 change is a genuine internal archaeological mystery? Maybe they adopted new cultural practices, maybe long-term environmental factors forced a change in how they gathered, or maybe they just transitioned into the later mound-building village cultures we see in the region. But it was an indigenous transformation.
Yes. However, we absolutely must discuss the catastrophic post-1492 era, because that is the missing puzzle piece that explains why the Amazon appeared empty to later explorers.
Right, because the European arrival triggered an absolute apocalypse.
A complete collapse.
Introduced diseases like smallpox and influenza, to which the indigenous populations had zero biological immunity, swept through the continent faster than the explorers themselves. That biological devastation was compounded by brutal slave raiding, forced labor, warfare, and mass displacement. This gutted the Amazonian populations.
The mortality rates were staggering. It fundamentally broke down those ancient trade networks, the sustainable food systems, and the regional organization that maintained the forest garden.
And this later tragedy is exactly why 18th and 19th century European accounts described an empty, pristine wilderness. When those explorers floated down the rivers, they were looking at a post-apocalyptic landscape, not a virgin forest.
Exactly.
The people had been decimated, the orchards had gone feral, and the jungle had quickly grown over the earthworks.
And yet, we must emphasize a crucial point here. The indigenous peoples did not mysteriously vanish.
I am so glad you brought that up, because that is a terrible, persistent trope. The descendants adapted, they survived, and they're still there today, continuing to defend their territories and their histories.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, this 2026 nature study wasn't just a bunch of academics flying around with lasers. The research team actually collaborated with indigenous scholars, including Francisco Apirana.
That collaboration is vital for giving the data real meaning. They matched the high-tech LiDAR archaeological findings with living Apiranan oral histories.
Which is amazing.
It really is. The indigenous knowledge concerning ancestral landscapes, the massive scale of historical gatherings, and their deep relationship with the environment directly informed how the researchers understood the purpose of the Aquari earthworks.
It proves that the memory of these massive gathering places never truly died. The stories were passed down even when the structures were hidden under the canopy. And it's also why the exact GPS coordinates of these newly mapped sites are kept deliberately vague in the public data.
Standard archaeological practice today involves protecting those coordinates. It shields this incredibly sensitive cultural heritage from modern threats like looting, illegal logging, and unauthorized agricultural development.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, the physical evidence should reinforce indigenous rights to their ancestral lands, not expose those lands to modern exploitation.
So when we take a step back from the lasers, the ping pong ball analogies, and the population math, what is the core takeaway for you?
The evidence undeniably proves that massive areas of Amazonia were socially organized and extensively managed by complex societies for thousands of years. They engineered the soil, they organized immense labor projects, and they lived sustainably within the forest rather than clear-cutting it.
Right.
While the exact population numbers will remain a healthy scientific debate requiring more ground excavation, the old myth of the Amazon as an untouched wilderness is officially unequivocally dead.
It really is. And for me, reflecting on this broader mystery, the real enigma isn't how a complex civilization could exist in the rainforest. The evidence for that is right there in the dark earth and the massive geometric shapes.
Yeah.
The true mystery is the sheer hubris of the outsiders who spent so many centuries arrogantly assuming that it couldn't. They ignored the obvious signs in the cultivated forest garden, and they completely dismissed the oral histories of the people who never forgot who they were or what they built.
It's a powerful testament to how our preconceived biases can blind us, and how new technology, when thoughtfully paired with respect for living history, can force us to rewrite our understanding of human potential.
Which leaves you with a final, staggering thought to take with you today. This entire paradigm shift, this revelation of up to 30,000 massive earthworks and millions of people living in a managed forest garden, was largely modeled from a LiDAR survey covering just 4,497 square kilometers.
Right.
The Amazon basin is roughly 6.7 million square kilometers. If surveying such a tiny microscopic fraction of the forest can rewrite the history of the Americas this drastically, well, what on earth is waiting to be found beneath the millions of square kilometers of canopy that no laser has ever touched?
Share your thoughts with My Mind Mashups on our social platforms. Your perspective could help shape a future deep dive.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, like, share, follow, or subscribe wherever you listen.
My Mind Mashups is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, TikTok, and Pocket Casts.
We didn't come this far just to come this far. This is My Mind Mashups.